She slapped her in the emergency room, but the silence that followed was far more terrifying than the sound. Because the man on the hospital bed opened his eyes, and what he saw changed everything. The emergency room at St. Vincent Medical Center was never truly quiet. Machines hummed, shoes scraped, voices murmured behind curtains that never fully hid anything. It was a place where chaos disguised itself as routine, where pain became background noise. But at 9:42 p.m., something broke that rhythm. A sharp crack. Not mechanical, not accidental. A slap. Heads turned. Nurses froze mid-step. Even the distant beeping monitors seemed to hesitate, as if the entire room had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Standing beside bed 17 was Evelyn Carter. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect control, except for the tremor in her hand, still suspended in the air from the impact. In front of her stood Leila Monroe, a woman 10 years younger, her cheek already blooming red. Her eyes wide, not just from pain, but from humiliation. And lying between them was Daniel Carter. Unconscious, pale, cubes threading into his body like fragile lifelines, his chest rising slowly under the sterile hospital sheet. Or at least, he was supposed to be unconscious. "Don't you ever come near my husband again," Evelyn said, her voice low, controlled but laced with something uglier beneath. Possession, dominance, a declaration. Leila let out a shaky laugh, though her eyes flickered toward Daniel for just a second too long. "Your husband?" she echoed softly. "You still call him that?" That one sentence didn't raise in volume, but it cut deeper than the slap. A nurse finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, you can't. This is a hospital." Evelyn didn't even look at her. Her eyes stayed locked on Leila. "You think I don't know?" Evelyn continued. "You think I didn't see the messages? The late nights? The work emergencies?" Leila didn't deny it. That was the first mistake. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, almost spitting. "He was already gone before I showed up." Another silence, heavier this time. Because that sentence wasn't just a defense. It was an accusation. And somewhere in that room, something invisible shifted. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came out immediately. For a split second, barely noticeable, her composure cracked. But then she recovered. Of course she did. Women like Evelyn didn't lose control. They redefined it. "You're delusional," she said coldly. "He's my husband. Whatever fantasy you built in your head." It wasn't a fantasy. Leila's voice was quiet now. Too quiet. And then she did something dangerous. She stepped closer to the bed. Closer to Daniel. "Do you even know," Leila whispered, "what he said the night before the accident?" Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer, didn't ask. Because some questions are more terrifying than the answers. But Leila continued anyway. "He said he felt invisible." The word hung in the air. Invisible. And suddenly, everything in the room felt sharper. Too sharp. Evelyn let out a short, bitter laugh. "So that's your angle? You saved him?" "No," Leila said, her eyes finally hardening. "I saw him." That was when it happened. A small sound, barely noticeable. A shift in the sheets. At first, no one reacted, because it was too subtle, too impossible. But then, a beep. Faster. Another. The monitor beside Daniel's bed flickered. His fingers twitched. Once, then again. The nurse gasped. "Doctor!" Everything erupted at once. Footsteps, voices, urgency. But in the middle of the chaos, Daniel's eyes slowly opened. Blurred at first, disoriented, then focusing. And the first thing he saw was Evelyn, standing there, perfect, controlled, untouchable. And just behind her, Leila, tearful, shaken, real. Two worlds, two versions of truth. And in that fragile moment between life and clarity, Daniel didn't speak, didn't react. But his eyes stayed on Leila, not his wife. That was the second thing that shouldn't have happened. Evelyn noticed. Of course she did. And for the first time that night, something cold slipped into her chest. Not anger, not jealousy. Something worse. Uncertainty. The kind that cracks foundations. "Daniel," she said softly, stepping closer, her voice suddenly different, almost gentle. "Baby, I'm here." But his gaze didn't move. Still on Leila. Still searching. As if trying to confirm something. Or someone. And then, his lips parted. The entire room leaned into that moment. Waiting. "What happened?" he whispered. A simple question, but the answers surrounding it were anything but simple. Because outside that hospital room, there were messages, secrets, a timeline that didn't make sense, and a truth that neither woman was ready to face. What happened? It should have been a simple question, a natural one. But in that room, thick with tension, pride, and unspoken truths, it became something else entirely. A trigger. Because the answer depended on who was telling it. Daniel, don't try to talk, Evelyn said immediately, stepping forward with practiced urgency. Her hand reached for his gentle, controlled, perfectly timed. You were in an accident. You've been unconscious for 2 days. Her voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that wasn't meant to comfort, but to control the narrative. Daniel's eyes flickered to her hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold back either. That hesitation lasted less than a second. Still, Evelyn felt it, like a crack forming under polished glass. Behind her, Lila didn't move, didn't interrupt, but she didn't leave either. That alone said everything. Accident, Daniel repeated weakly, his voice dry, disconnected, as if the word belonged to someone else's life. His gaze drifted past Evelyn again, back to Lila. That same look, searching, not desire, not even affection, recognition, and something unresolved. The doctor rushed in, followed by 2 nurses, their movements efficient, but eyes subtly scanning the emotional battlefield they had walked into. Mr. Carter, can you hear me? The doctor asked, shining a light into Daniel's eyes. Daniel blinked slowly. Yeah. Good. You were involved in a car accident. Do you remember anything? A pause. Longer this time. Because something flickered across Daniel's face. Not confusion, not fully. Fragments. Rain. A red light. A phone screen lighting up in the dark. A name. Not saved with a heart. Not hidden either. Just a name. Lila. Daniel's breathing shifted slightly. The monitor responded instantly. Beep. Faster. Sir? The doctor pressed. Daniel swallowed. I was driving, he said slowly. I think I was on the highway. Evelyn nodded quickly. Yes, you were coming home from work. Too quick, too certain. The doctor didn't react, but Lila did. A supple shift of her weight, a tightening of her jaw, because she knew something Evelyn didn't. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Work? He repeated. The word didn't sit right. It hovered, unsettled. Let's not push him, the doctor said, stepping in smoothly. Memory gaps are normal after trauma. We'll run a few tests. He turned to the nurses. Prep for CT. Monitor vitals closely. The room moved again. Clinical. Controlled. But underneath, everything was unraveling. As they adjusted the bed, Evelyn stepped aside, but not far. Never far. She watched every movement, every glance, every flicker of Daniel's attention, especially when he drifted again. To Lila. You should leave, Evelyn said quietly, not looking at her. It wasn't a request, it was a warning. Lila didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were on Daniel. Not emotional, not dramatic, just present. I just wanted to make sure he was alive, she said softly. Evelyn let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Congratulations, he is. You can go now. Still, Lila didn't move, and that hesitation was louder than any argument. Why are you still here? Evelyn asked, turning now, her voice sharpening just enough to cut. This time, Lila met her gaze directly, because this moment had been building long before the hospital. You really want to ask that? She said. Evelyn stepped closer, too close. This is not your place. No, Lila agreed quietly. Then, her eyes flicked to Daniel again. But neither is pretending. That landed, hard, because it wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about something deeper. Something Evelyn had spent months, maybe years avoiding. Enough, Evelyn snapped, her control slipping just a fraction. But Daniel spoke, weak, barely audible, still enough to freeze both of them. Stay. Silence. Total. Absolute. Even the machines felt quieter. Evelyn turned slowly. Daniel? His eyes were still half open, still fragile, but clear enough. He wasn't looking at Evelyn, he was looking at Lila. Just, for a minute, he added. That was it. Not a declaration, not a confession, but in that moment, it felt like betrayal. Evelyn's fingers curled tightly at her sides, her nails pressing into her palm hard enough to leave marks. But she didn't explode, didn't scream, didn't cry, because this wasn't the kind of woman who lost in public. Instead, she smiled. Soft, controlled, deadly. Of course, she said, her voice almost sweet. Whatever you need. But her eyes said something entirely different. The nurses began moving Daniel's bed out of the room, toward imaging, toward answers, toward something none of them were prepared for. As the bed rolled past Lila, Daniel's hand shifted slightly, not reaching, not quite, but enough. Lila noticed, so did Evelyn. And in that narrow hallway, filled with fluorescent lights and quiet judgment, 3 people moved forward, bound by something fragile, something broken, something already too far gone. Because the accident wasn't the beginning, it was the interruption. And somewhere, buried in Daniel's fractured memory, was the one detail no one had said out loud yet. Not Evelyn, not Lila, not even him. He hadn't been driving home. The thought didn't arrive all at once. It surfaced in fragments, like broken glass rising through dark water, cutting through the illusion piece by piece. The CT scan room was cold, not just in temperature, but in feeling. Clinical, detached, unforgiving. Daniel lay still as the machine hummed around him, its mechanical rhythm steady, almost indifferent to the storm building inside his mind. "Try to relax, Mr. Carter," the technician said through the speaker. "Relax." The word felt almost absurd, because now the images were coming faster. Not clear, not complete, but enough. A highway exit, not the one he took to go home. Another one, further, darker. His grip tightening on the steering wheel. A message still glowing on his phone screen in the cup holder. 3 words. "Are you coming? Lila." The machine continued its slow rotation, but Daniel's breathing shifted again. Shallow, uneven, because now came the part he couldn't ignore. He had answered, yes. The memory hit harder than the impact ever could. Back in the hallway, Evelyn stood perfectly still. From the outside, she looked composed, arms crossed lightly, posture elegant, face unreadable. But inside, everything was calculating, rebuilding, reframing. He asked her to stay, not his wife, her. That moment replayed over and over in her head, not as pain, but as a problem to solve. Because Evelyn didn't process emotions, she controlled outcomes. A nurse walked past, then another. Life moved on around her, but Evelyn's world had narrowed into something sharp and focused. This wasn't about love anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about position, control, narrative, and she was not going to lose it. At the far end of the hallway, Lila sat alone, hands clasped tightly together. Not crying, not panicking, but thinking. Because she knew something Evelyn didn't, something Daniel hadn't said yet. Something that could destroy everything, or confirm it. He wasn't just coming to see her that night. He was going to tell the truth. Lila closed her eyes briefly, and for the first time since arriving, she looked afraid. Because now that he was awake, there was no controlling what came next. The CT scan ended. The machine slid back. The silence returned. "All right, Mr. Carter, we're done," the technician said. "Doctor will review the results shortly." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the ceiling, but not really seeing it. Because now another memory surfaced. Clearer, sharper. Rain hitting the windshield harder, the road slick, light stretching into blurred lines, and his own voice on speaker. "I can't keep doing this, Lila." Silence on the other end. Then don't. A pause, heavy, loaded. "I'm coming," he had said. Not just physically, but decisively. The moment everything was supposed to change. Then, a flash of headlights. Too close, too fast, and nothing. Daniel's eyes shut tightly. A small reaction, but enough. When they wheeled him back into the hallway, both women stood up at the same time. Almost instinctively, almost symmetrically. But the energy between them had shifted. Evelyn stepped forward first. Of course she did. "Daniel, how do you feel?" she asked softly, her hand already reaching for the rail of the bed. Lila didn't move closer. She waited, watched. Because this moment wasn't hers to take. It was his to choose. Daniel turned his head slowly. His eyes landed on Evelyn first, and something in his expression changed. Not anger, not even hurt. Distance. The kind that doesn't come from a single moment, but from a long, quiet accumulation of truths finally acknowledged. "Evelyn," he said. Her name, spoken clearly, steadily. Relief flashed across her face, quick, subtle, but real. But then, he stopped, because the rest of the sentence didn't come. Instead, his eyes shifted. To Lila. Again. That same unresolved pull. But now, it wasn't confusion. It was memory. The doctor stepped in, breaking the moment. "Good news. No major brain injury. Some trauma, mild concussion. We'll keep you for observation." Evelyn nodded immediately. Of course, whatever he needs. But Daniel barely heard it. Because now, there was only one question left in his mind. And it wasn't about the accident. It was about before. "What day is it?" he asked suddenly. The question caught both women off guard. "Friday," the doctor answered. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Because that meant everything lined up. The message, the drive, the decision, and the truth he was about to speak. Evelyn sensed it. Not logically, but instinctively. "Daniel," she said quickly, her tone shifting just slightly more urgent now. "You need to rest. We can talk later." There it was, control, reasserted. But this time, it didn't land the same. Daniel looked at her. Really looked, as if seeing something he had ignored for too long. Then quietly, clearly, "I wasn't coming home." Silence. No machines, no footsteps, no voices. Just that sentence. Lila closed her eyes, because it was out now. And Evelyn didn't react immediately. Not because she wasn't affected, but because her mind was moving too fast, trying to catch up, trying to reshape reality before it collapsed. But this time, she was too late. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. I was going to see her. No hesitation, no apology, just truth. And in that moment, everything Evelyn believed she still controlled shattered. But the real damage wasn't a confession. It was what came next. Because Daniel wasn't finished. I was going to see her. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed exactly where they were meant to. Sharp, precise, irreversible. Evelyn didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Because reacting too fast would mean losing control. And control was the only thing she had left. Around them, the hospital continued its quiet choreography. Nurses passing, distant voices, machines humming. But inside that small space, everything had stopped. Lila stood frozen at the foot of the bed. Not victorious, not relieved, just exposed. Because the truth, once spoken, doesn't belong to anyone anymore. Daniel swallowed slowly, his throat dry, his body still weak, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. I wasn't confused, he continued, his voice low but steady. I wasn't lost. I knew exactly where I was going. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the bed rail. A small movement, but it revealed everything. Daniel, she said softly, carefully, as if speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile. You just woke up. You're not thinking clearly. That used to work. For years it worked, reframing his reality, softening his certainty, turning his instincts into doubt. But not anymore. I remember enough, Daniel replied. And then he looked at her. Really looked. Not as a husband, not as a man trying to hold something together, but as someone seeing the truth for the first time and realizing how long he had ignored it. You brought her here, he said. Not a question, a statement. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but her silence answered for her. In front of everyone, Daniel added. His eyes flickered briefly to Lila's reddened cheek, then back to Evelyn. That was the moment something shifted. Not anger, not rage, recognition. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then finally, she moved, stepping closer, reclaiming space, reclaiming presence. She crossed the line, Evelyn said calmly. I reacted. Simple, clean, justified. But Daniel didn't nod, didn't accept it. She didn't cross a line, he said quietly. A beat. Then, we did. That landed differently. He wasn't defending Lila. He was naming something bigger, something shared. Evelyn's eyes hardened just slightly. Don't romanticize this, she said, her voice losing a layer of softness. Whatever you think this is, it's not real. There it was, the affair comparison, the narrative, the belief that what he had with Lila was illusion and what they had was reality. But Daniel's expression didn't shift, because for the first time, he wasn't trying to protect Evelyn's version of the truth. It was real enough for me to leave, he said. Silence. Lila inhaled sharply, not because she didn't know, but because hearing it out loud made it irreversible. Evelyn let out a small laugh, but it wasn't amused. It was controlled disbelief. Leave, she repeated. You think you were leaving me? The question wasn't emotional, it was territorial. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because this part was harder. Not the affair, not the betrayal, but the truth behind it. I already did, he said finally. That was the fracture. Not loud, not explosive, but final. Evelyn's composure slipped, just for a second. But it was enough. Don't do that, she said sharply. Don't twist this into something it's not. You made a mistake. That's what this is. A mistake. Something temporary. Something forgivable. Something small. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, he said. A mistake is something you hide. A beat. Then I was on my way to tell you. That changed everything. Lila looked up, eyes wide. Because that part he had never said before. Even Evelyn wasn't prepared for that. Tell me what, she asked, her voice quieter now. Not softer, just less certain. Daniel held her gaze, and for the first time there was no hesitation. The truth, he said. The word lingered, heavy, unavoidable. Evelyn's mind moved fast, too fast, trying to reframe, reposition, regain control. You're not leaving me for her, she said. Not a question, a correction. Daniel didn't argue, didn't push. I'm leaving, he said simply. And somehow, that was worse. Because it wasn't about Lila anymore. It was about him. His choice, his clarity, his boundary. Evelyn stepped back slightly, a rare movement, instinctive, as if the ground beneath her had shifted and for the first time she couldn't stabilize it. You're confused, she said again, but the conviction wasn't there anymore. Daniel didn't respond, because there was nothing left to argue. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, uncontrolled. Then, a small sound. Leela. You are going to tell her tonight? She asked. Daniel turned his head toward her, slowly, and nodded. That confirmation, soft, simple, destroyed the last illusion. Because now, it wasn't an affair caught in chaos, it was a decision interrupted. Evelyn saw it, understood it, and that's when something inside her finally cracked. Not into sadness, not into grief, but into something colder. You don't get to walk away clean, she said quietly. Both of them looked at her, because the tone had changed, completely. This isn't some noble exit, Evelyn continued. You don't get to rewrite the story where you're the honest one. Daniel didn't react, but Lila did, a subtle tension in her shoulders. Because now, this wasn't just emotional. It was about to become something else, something strategic, something dangerous. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, watching Daniel, studying him, and then she smiled. Not warm, not kind, precise. If you were really going to tell me the truth, she said softly, then maybe you should tell her everything. A pause. Or should I? The room shifted, again, because whatever Evelyn knew hadn't been said yet, and suddenly Lila didn't look so certain anymore. Or should I? Evelyn's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because power, when it's real, rarely announces itself loudly. The room tightened, not physically but psychologically, like the air itself had thinned. Lila's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. Because whatever Evelyn was about to say wasn't impulsive. It was chosen. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Not defensive, not panicked, just alert. For the first time since waking up, he didn't feel in control of the truth anymore. What are you talking about? Lila asked, her voice steady but just a fraction too careful. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She walked slowly to the side of the bed, each step deliberate, measured. Then she looked at Daniel, not with anger, not with heartbreak, but with something colder. You really don't know? She asked softly. That question wasn't for Lila, it was for him. And that's when something shifted again. Because Daniel didn't respond right away. Not because he was confused, but because a small, uncomfortable thought began forming. What don't I know? He asked quietly. Evelyn smiled faintly, not out of amusement but precision. Let's start simple, she said. How long has this been going on? Lila's jaw tightened. That's not your. Answer the question, Evelyn cut in sharply. Not loud, but absolute. A pause. 6 months, Lila said finally. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if confirming something already known. 6 months, she repeated. Interesting. Dania frowned slightly, because something in her tone didn't match the situation. Why does that matter? He asked. Evelyn turned to him, and for the first time there was no performance in her face, just clarity. Because, she said quietly, that's exactly when your promotion fell through. Silence. The words didn't explode, they sank. Daniel's expression didn't change immediately, but something behind his eyes did, because now the timeline mattered. What does that have to do with anything? He asked, slower this time. Evelyn didn't look at him, she looked at Lila. Go ahead, she said. Tell him where you work. Lila didn't move, didn't speak. That hesitation said everything. Daniel's chest tightened, just slightly. Lila, he said, his voice lower now, more focused. Answer her. A beat. I work in consulting, Lila said. Evelyn let out a quiet breath, almost disappointed. Not very specific, she said. Then she delivered it. You work for Henderson and Cole. Daniel's body stilled, because that name meant something. A rival firm. The same one that had quietly taken over the contract he was supposed to lead. The one that cost him everything he had worked toward for 2 years. That's not, Lila started. But Evelyn didn't let her finish. You were assigned to the Morrison account, Evelyn continued cuddly. 3 weeks before Daniel's team lost it. Daniel's pulse spiked. The monitor responded instantly. Beep, beep, beep. Because now, this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about something deeper. Tell me I'm wrong, Evelyn said softly, but she wasn't asking. Lila looked at Daniel, and for the first time, she didn't look steady. I didn't know at first, she said quickly. I didn't even know he was connected to that account. At first? Evelyn repeated. That was enough. Daniel's gaze locked onto Lila, sharp now, focused. You didn't know at first? He echoed. The words felt heavier coming out, because now he was no longer just processing emotion. He was analyzing, the way he always did. What does that mean? He asked. Lila stepped closer, not to Evelyn, to him. It means it wasn't like that, she said. I met you at the conference before I knew anything about your firm, about the account. And after you knew? Evelyn pressed. Silence. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. Daniel's breathing slowed, not because he was calm, but because something inside him was shutting down, reorganizing. You kept seeing me, he said, not a question. Leela's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. No, she said quietly, I kept choosing you. That should have meant something, once. But now it sounded different, because intention didn't erase impact. Evelyn stepped back slightly, watching, not interrupting anymore, because now she didn't need to. Daniel looked between them, slowly. His wife, his lover. One had humiliated him, the other had hidden something that touched his entire life. And suddenly, the lines weren't so clear anymore. Did you know about the deal? He asked Leela. She hesitated, just for a second, too long. Yes, she said, that was it. No explanation, no defense, just truth. And it landed harder than everything else combined. Because this time, it wasn't emotional betrayal. It was calculated silence. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, not in pain, not even in anger, but in recognition of something he hadn't wanted to see. I told you everything, he said quietly. Lila didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. Evelyn watched the shift happen in real time, the fracture, the recalibration. And for the first time since the slap, she wasn't reacting. She was winning. But not in the way she expected, because Daniel didn't turn back to her, didn't reach for her, didn't soften. Instead, he opened his eyes and looked at both of them equally. And what was in his expression now was something neither of them had prepared for. Detachment. Cold. Clear. Final. You should both go, he said. The words were quiet, but absolute. Evelyn blinked, just once. Lila froze, because that wasn't part of either narrative. You don't mean that, Evelyn said quickly. Daniel didn't respond. I need time, he added. Alone. No anger. No accusation. Just distance. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. Because in that moment, neither of them mattered. Not as a wife, not as a lover, just noise. And as the nurses began guiding them out, Evelyn turned back one last time, expecting something, a look, a hesitation. But Daniel was already staring at the ceiling again, as if they were gone, as if he had already left them first, because the real shift had just begun. The room felt different after they left, not quieter, just honest. Daniel lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, the steady rhythm of the monitor now the only thing proving he was still present. Beep, beep, beep. For the first time in months, no voices, no expectations, no roles to play, just truth. And it was heavier than anything he had carried before, because now it was all there, unfiltered, unavoidable. Evelyn, Lila, the marriage, the affair, the deal, the accident. None of it felt separate anymore. It was one continuous line of decisions, some his, some theirs, all leading here. A nurse stepped in quietly to adjust his IV. Try to rest, she said gently. Daniel didn't answer. Rest wasn't possible, not when his mind was finally awake. Because now, he wasn't replaying emotions, he was analyzing patterns. Evelyn's voice, her control, the way she had already known. That wasn't suspicion, that was preparation. And Lila, her hesitation, her silence, the timing of everything. That wasn't coincidence, that was awareness. Daniel exhaled slowly, and for the first time, a realization surfaced that didn't hurt. It clarified. Neither of them had lied completely, but neither of them had told the whole truth either. And somehow, that was worse, because partial truth creates illusion, and illusion was what had kept him there, for years. A soft knock broke the silence, not a nurse this time. A man stepped in, mid-40s, clean suit, calm presence. Daniel. Daniel turned his head slightly. Recognition flickered. Mark, he said. Mark Sullivan. Not just a friend, not just a colleague. His attorney. And more importantly, the only person Daniel had spoken to before the accident. Mark closed the door behind him, slowly, carefully. I came as soon as I heard, he said, pulling a chair closer. Daniel studied him, because Mark didn't look surprised. You already knew, Daniel said, not a question. Mark didn't deny it. You called me, he replied, that night. There it was, the missing piece. Daniel's eyes sharpened. Before the crash? Mark nodded. You said you were done, he continued, with everything. Everything, not just Evelyn, not just the affair. Everything. Daniel's fingers twitched slightly against the hospital sheet. "What did I tell you?" he asked. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. "You told me to prepare the papers," he said. "Divorce, asset separation, full audit." A pause. And something else. Daniel didn't speak, but his gaze held. "You said," Mark continued, "if anything happened to you, I should move forward anyway." Silence. Not shock, confirmation. Because deep down, Daniel already knew. He hadn't been reacting that night, he had been deciding. "I didn't want to wake up still inside it," Daniel said quietly. Mark nodded once. "I figured." Another pause. Then Mark reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thin folder, set it on the table beside the bed. "Everything's ready," he said. "Simple, clean, final." Daniel looked at it, didn't touch it, because that folder wasn't just paperwork. It was consequence, of clarity, of boundaries, of a line finally drawn. "They'll fight it," Mark added calmly, "especially her." Daniel let out a slow breath. "I'm not fighting," he said. That wasn't weakness, it was detachment. And Mark saw it immediately. "Good," he said, "because this isn't about winning." Daniel turned his head slightly. "It's about ending," Mark finished. That landed. Because for the first time, Daniel didn't feel like he was losing something. He felt like he was stepping out of something. A system, a dynamic, a version of himself that no longer fit. A soft vibration interrupted the moment Daniel's phone, placed on the side table. Mark glanced at it, then at him. "Do you want it?" he asked. A pause. Daniel nodded. Mark handed it over. The screen lit up. 2 messages. One from Evelyn. "We need to talk. This isn't over." The other from Lila. "I never meant to hurt you. Please don't shut me out." Daniel stared at both. Once, those messages would have pulled him in opposite directions. Now, they felt the same. Noise. He locked the screen, set the phone down, face down. Decision made. "I'm signing it," he said. Marv didn't ask which one. He already knew. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean, because for the first time in a long time, Daniel wasn't reacting to either of them. He wasn't choosing between them. He was choosing himself. And somewhere outside that room, Evelyn was already planning her next move. Lila was already losing her place in the story. But neither of them realized the game they thought they were playing had already ended. Evelyn Carter had never been a woman who waited. Not for answers, not for permission, and certainly not for closure. The moment she stepped out of the hospital, her phone was already in her hand. Call logs, contacts, messages, everything moved fast, precise. Because what happened in that room wasn't just a confrontation, it was a shift in power, and Evelyn had felt it, deeply, instinctively. Daniel didn't argue, didn't defend, didn't explain. He withdrew, and that was something she couldn't control. "He's in shock," she said out loud, more to herself than anyone else. "That's all this is." But the words didn't settle, they hovered, unconvincing. Because Evelyn understood psychology better than she ever admitted. Shock looks chaotic, emotional, unstable. What she saw in Daniel was none of that. It was structured, quiet, final, and that terrified her. Across the parking lot, Lila stood alone under the harsh white lights, arms wrapped around herself. Still, she hadn't left. Of course she hadn't. Evelyn watched her for a moment. Then she walked toward her, slow, controlled, each step deliberate. "You're still here," Evelyn said, stopping a few feet away. Lila didn't flinch this time, didn't look away. "I wasn't finished," she replied. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, almost curious. "Finished with what?" she asked. "Lying? Or pretending you didn't know exactly what you were doing?" Lila exhaled slowly. "I didn't plan any of this," she said. Evelyn let out a quiet laugh. "That's the problem," she replied. "People like you never think you're planning anything." A pause. "But you always benefit from it." That landed, because there was truth in it. Uncomfortable truth. Lila's jaw tightened. "You think you're better than me?" she asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I know I am. Not arrogance, not ego. Certainty." And for a second Lila didn't respond. Because that kind of confidence doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from years of control, years of winning, years of shaping reality until it fits. But tonight, something had slipped. "You lost him," Lila said quietly. The words were soft, but they cut deeper than the slap ever could. Evelyn's expression didn't change. "No," she said calmly. Then, a beat, he stepped out of line. That was how she saw it. Not loss, not rejection. Deviation. Something to correct. Lila shook her head slightly. "You still don't get it," she said. Evelyn stepped closer. just enough to close the space between them. Then explain it to me, she said softly, and for the first time there was no hostility in her tone, just curiosity, because she wanted to understand something very specific. Why him? Out of everything she controlled, why was he the only variable she couldn't stabilize? Lila met her gaze. Because you never saw him, she said. There it was again, that word, saw. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. I built his life, she replied. Everything he has, everything he is. Exactly, Lila cut in. A pause. Then you built it, not they. You. That distinction shifted something. Because suddenly, it wasn't about what Evelyn gave. It was about what she took. Control, voice, identity. Evelyn's silence stretched, not empty. Processing. You think he wants that? She asked. Lila didn't hesitate. No, she said. Simple. Final. And for the first time that night, Evelyn didn't have an immediate response. Because deep down, she recognized the possibility. And that was enough to destabilize everything. Her phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. She opened it. One sentence. He signed it. Evelyn's breath stopped. Just for a second. Not long, but long enough. Lila noticed. What is it? She asked. Evelyn didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the screen, reading the message again and again, because it didn't make sense. Not yet. Not fully. But it would. Soon. He wouldn't do that, Evelyn said quietly. But the certainty was gone, because she knew exactly what it meant. Papers. Final. Not emotional. Not reactive, prepared, planned, executed. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The calm, the silence, the detachment. It wasn't shock, it was intention. Evelyn looked up slowly, not at Lila, but past her, as if seeing something much further away, much harder to reach. He didn't just leave, she whispered, and for the first time, her voice wasn't controlled. It was uncertain. He was already gone. The realization didn't break her, not yet. But it did something worse. It cracked the illusion. And once that happens, control becomes impossible. Lila stepped back slightly, because now she understood something too. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was aftermath. And neither of them had won. Because the only person who mattered was no longer playing. 5 years later, the city hadn't changed. But everything else had. Evelyn Carter stood in front of the glass window of a quiet cafe, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger she used to know. Perfect posture. Controlled expression. Impeccable appearance. But the illusion didn't hold the same weight anymore, because now there was no one left to believe it. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. Another notification, another message, another name she didn't care about. She didn't check it, not anymore, because for the past 5 years, nothing that came through that screen had ever been the one thing she was waiting for. Daniel, not his voice, not his message, not even a trace. He had disappeared from her life the same way he left that hospital room, quietly, completely. No closure, no confrontation, no return. At first, she thought it was temporary, a phase, a reaction, then a strategy, then a punishment. But eventually, she understood the truth. It wasn't about her at all. It never was. Across the street, a couple laughed as they walked past. Carefree, unaware. Evelyn watched them for a moment, then looked away. Because once you understand what you've lost, other people's happiness becomes noise. She reached for her coffee. It had gone cold, just like everything else she had tried to hold on to. 1 year after the divorce, she had tried to rebuild. New relationships, new circles, new image. It worked, on the surface. But underneath, something was off. Because no matter who sat across from her, no one stayed. Not because they left, but because she couldn't feel them. Not really. And slowly, the realization came. It wasn't that Daniel was special. It was that he was the only one who had loved her without conditions. And she had mistaken that for weakness. 3 years after, she saw Lila once. By accident. At a corporate event. Different city, different crowd. But the recognition was immediate. Lila looked smaller, not physically, but emotionally. Less certain, less defined. They didn't speak at first. Just a glance. A pause. Then Lila approached. "Hi," she said quietly. Evelyn nodded once. Polite, distant. "How are you?" Lila asked. A meaningless question. Evelyn gave a meaningless answer. "I'm good." Silence followed, because both of them knew that wasn't true. Not completely. "Do you ever hear from him?" Lila asked. There it was. The one question neither of them had been able to escape. Evelyn didn't hesitate. No. Lila nodded slowly. Me neither. That was the confirmation. Not of loss, but of finality. Because Daniel didn't just leave the marriage, he left the entire narrative. Now, 5 years later, Evelyn finally understood something she had refused to accept back then. The slap, the hospital, the confrontation. None of that mattered. She didn't lose him that night. She lost him long before that. The moment respect disappeared. The moment she stopped seeing him. The moment she believed he would never leave. That was when it ended. She just didn't realize it, until it was too late. The cafe door opened. A cold breeze swept in. Evelyn glanced up, just for a second, a habit she never broke. Every time the door opened, a part of her still expected him. But it was never him, not once. And deep down, she knew why. Because men like Daniel don't come back. Not after they've seen everything clearly. Across the city, in a quiet office overlooking the water, Daniel Carter closed his laptop. Calm, focused, unbothered. No photos on the desk, no reminders of the past. Just space, intentional, clean. A colleague knocked lightly. Dinner with the team? Daniel thought for a second, then nodded. Yeah, he said. Simple, normal, free. No hesitation, no weight. Because the life he built now didn't need to prove anything, didn't need to be seen, didn't need to be validated. And most importantly, didn't include her. Back in the cafe, Evelyn finally picked up her phone, scrolled, paused, then opened an old contact. Still saved, still untouched. Daniel. Her thumb hovered over the screen, for a long time. Too long, because she already knew what would happen. Nothing. No reply, no closure, no second chance. Slowly, she locked the phone, set it down, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't try to reach him. Because now, she understood something with painful clarity. You don't lose someone when they walk away. You lose them when you convince yourself they'll never have the strength to. And Daniel? He didn't leave to hurt her. He left because he finally saw her. And once you see the truth clearly, you can never love the illusion again.